Good morning, everybody. Hope you all had a wonderful first evening of ABRF. I'm very excited about the turnout. This is a great sign for our session and for all the sessions to follow. And with all of you here, I'm hoping you're going to leave here either super excited, super depressed, but more importantly, I hope you stick through. So for today's session, we're all focusing on centralization. What does this mean? How can we use it to our advantage at our institution? The goal for today is just to start the framework for the discussion, right? A lot of it is to set the terminology and also to create the lay of the land as to where are we at? Where are our colleagues at their institutions? So the three of us have been working, trying to aggregate this information, to centralize it. Yeah, see, it's as if I thought about this a little bit. And we're going to go through what we have found so far. We're going to present for about 20-ish minutes, and then we're going to open the floor up to discussion, because there's a lot of questions that we have, and this is also just the beginning. We're going to keep pursuing this over time. Every year, we're going to make more progress, get more information to help create roadmaps for us to get to where it is the right fit for our institutions. So I'm going to start with an introduction of the panel. Then we're going to go in, why are we starting here? Why did we start with the survey? I'm a big fan of deliverables. I like to produce things so that we don't have to keep rehashing the same discussion and keep redoing the exact same thing. We're going to go through the deliverables that we're going to deliver, or the survey results, and then open discussion. That is dependent upon you. So let's start with some audience participation. Show of hands. Whose institutions are reconsidering the structure or organization of their core facilities in light of the current fiscal environments? Follow-up question. How many of you are having a good time doing that? Perfect. I saw one hand forcefully put up. All right, so I'm going to start with myself. Part of the introduction isn't just about who I am, because nobody really gives a crap about who I am, but let's just talk about what my institution is, right? So I'm at the University of Colorado Boulder. It's part of the CU system, the University of Colorado system. We're an R1 public institution. We have about 40,000 people in total enrollment, including about 6,000 grad students, give or take, though that number may go down in the coming few months, but we'll go from there. 1,200 or so faculty. We don't have a medical school. There is a medical school down in Anschutz, but that's its own campus where they're independent of us. We don't have a vet school. We don't have a primate center, except for the fraternity structure. Sorry, yeah, we need drums. We have a pretty decent R&D expenditure, and the cores are currently very decentralized. Okay, and we're going to get into what that means here in a bit. We have about 21 to 25 cores, depending on how you count, and there is no lead unit yet for our course. I have a lot of responsibilities. I oversee the BioFrontiers Advanced Latin Microscopy core, so I'm in the trenches, but I also help oversee all of our core facilities across the entire campus. And in part of this responsibility, my job is to help support the cores, advocate for the cores, guide them, help them create metrics that actually mean something, tell them the importance of having legal rate sheets, you know, the whole shebang. Yes, it's a joke, but it's definitely real, right? And we have recently established a core advisory committee, which I'm very excited for. G2.
I'm Jeetendra Eswaraka at Rutgers University. Sorry. You would think you would know about it. So I'm Jeetendra Eswaraka. I'm at Rutgers University. So Rutgers is actually a complicated institution. It's got 2 R1 and 2 R2 universities all under one umbrella. So it's actually 4 universities. Our total enrollment in the main campus is about 60,000 students, undergraduate, and graduate students about 14,000. We have pretty large faculties. We have 2 medical schools, the New Jersey Medical School and the Robert Wood Johnson Medical School, Newark and New Brunswick. and we do have a cancer center, no vet school or primate center, and our annual R&D expenditure is about $969.5 million. About $550 million comes from federal. And our core structure is both centralized and decentralized cores. We've just finished our inventory of all so-called cores across the institution. Out of them, only 36 are now approved to be called as cores, because that means they need to have a rate structure, they need to follow the rules. 56 are under review, 54 are under review right now. Under centralization, our animal program is centralized, and then we have 7 scientific cores that we have now called them as university-wide cores. 2 are right now under negotiation with the different schools. And the Office for Research is the lead unit for the core facilities. Next slide. So when we got into this university-wide cores, right, I mean, we kind of started out in the basement. We just told, we heard core facilities are a mess, fix it. That is what the president wanted in 2019. So we started mainly, because of my expertise being a veterinarian, I started with the animal care facilities. So we had 3 different programs across the state. We merged them all into one. And then around 2023 is when we started to think about the scientific course, and then it became a whole different beast. So we knew that the whole point of centralization, everything is just not possible. So we then decided what are the platform technologies that we can centralize, and what are the ones that are better served being inside the schools. So my group's roles and responsibilities include, we have a centralized university core policy that we have to implement across, and manage the core platform, and provide business training for core directors, review rates, and approve setup of new cores, and develop a sustainable funding model for cores, because in our review of all core facilities, what we found, I'm assuming similar across the country, is cores were started from the basement up, right, I mean, by a group of faculty getting together. They don't have a sustainable funding model, so many of them are under big deficits. So we want our administrators to sign MOUs which clearly provides sustainable funding for the core facilities. And my office also acts as the liaison for interaction with the central finance, because it would take up to 8 to 9 months to get their rates approved. Now we do everything centrally through us. So and then once it goes there, it gets approved within a week. So we act as the conduit between tax group, the IT group, and the compliance unit. We manage the core facilities website, and also the voucher program and the S10 support mechanisms.
Good morning, I'm Isabelle Girard. I'm from UC Davis. And UC Davis is similar to University of Colorado. We're a R1 public land grant. We have a similar enrollment of about 40,000 with 7,600 graduate students. Interestingly, we have twice as many faculty as you have. We have a school of medicine, we have a cancer center, we have a school of vet med, we have a primate center. Where this year did $1 billion in R&D expenditure. Those numbers are from the HERD survey. We have a federated structure, meaning many of our cores sit in colleges or centers. A few report to the central campus through the Office of Research. We have about 100 cores, and that would mean professionally managed shared resource facilities with approved recharge rates. And again, some of them report through the Office of Research, and many of them report to deans or center directors. In our role in the Research Core Facilities Program under the Vice Chancellor for Research, we have responsibilities both to set the campus-wide program, and then we have direct oversight of a subset of those cores. So we're both broad kind of administrators and community builders for the cores. We cultivate a community of practice. We share best practices and implement policy. We do recommend central investments, and when there is funding, can direct funding. We advise various folks in startup funds and packages to avoid duplication, try to get instruments into shared facilities, and we coordinate the instrumentation grants. We have a research core directory, and importantly, we provide a uniform tool to manage cores and collect financial information, which is the StrataCore. We also have direct oversight, so we act as the lead college for a number of cores. So we are kind of micro-administrators taking all of the responsibility for human resources, finances, et cetera, for a subset of cores, but clearly not the other 93 cores that are on campus.
So why are we starting here? I would imagine that many of us feel that centralization is the solution, right? We've heard this for years. There are magnificent case studies out there, examples, Northwestern being, the leading of this, that Phil Hochberger figured it all out, and we want to be on that side of the rainbow, right? That's what we all think. However, upon inspection, what we have found is centralization really means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So before we can really start discussing and evaluating centralization, we had to make sure we're all speaking the same language. I mean, even just the 2 or 3 of us that have talked about this over the past year, we found that after a few months, we weren't even saying the same thing. So we had to create a baseline so that we could collectively move forward, right? So we're going to start by, or we started by asking everyone what they think they are. Not what are they, but what you think you actually are. So the survey purpose was to standardize terminology around centralization and help us all understand the scope, scale, and differences between the various structures that we find ourselves in. So, as with any good survey, it was bad. There are definite gaps in the survey, so there's going to be another survey, because who doesn't love filling out surveys, especially when you get points for said survey. So we're going to have a follow-up survey that fills in a lot of these gaps. We'll probably find more gaps, so we get to keep doing this over time. All of the data that you're about to see is going to be put up in a central repository, most likely JBT, right? That's where we're going to try to publish all this stuff. We're going to aggregate the institutional responses, so there's going to be no core specific details. So we'll make it core facility agnostic. So if you fill out the survey and I said, this is me, that's going to identify you, that information will be gone. It'll just be the institution and then that data. All right, and the big goal is, can we join the linked sessions, which you can see down in the colorful boxes below if you're trying to figure out your schedule for the rest of the week. Here it is. And we're going to try to make a JBT special issue. Now, since I'm on the JBT editorial board, I'm going to say we can do it. It's fantastic. All right. So it won't be perfect and it won't cover everything, but it will be in one place, right? The information will be there. How many of you have tried to scour the internet to try to find out what your peer institutions are like and can't find any of that information? I know I did. Right. So having it all in one spot is really going to help us out, especially in these uncertain times where the administrators are asking us to change left, right, and center. We'll have something we can point to. Gosh darn it. Stupid laptop.
Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about the survey. But again, we started this effort thinking, okay, there is some sort of magical centralization path, and some folks have figured this out, and we need to find those folks, and then we need to ask them how they did it, and then we're going to do what they did. Okay, so that's how we approach this, really to think about who had figured out this path. So we developed and published the core survey. We're going to show you results from responses that we received between November and February. The survey is still open, so any lull in the session here, you can fill it out. So first of all, we realized we couldn't just ask, are you centralized? We had to ask, are you centralized on these different traits? And there are probably 24 traits that you could look at in terms of, are you centralized? Is this a a responsibility that lies at the level of the institution or the campus-wide level, or is this a responsibility or characteristic of the department or local unit? There are probably 24 of those. We narrowed it down to, I don't know, what are those, 6 or 7, just to have a manageable framework. So in the survey, we asked people, okay, what is your primary organizational structure of your institution? Do you think you are centralized? Are your cores mainly reporting and determined at the institutional level, which we color-coded here as green? Are you operating more at a federated level, which means things are sitting, responsibilities are sitting in the colleges or centers? Or are you very distributed, meaning things are operating at the level of the department? So we asked, who designates you as a core? Again, is that local, kind of federated institution? Where does your financial support come from? Again, local department, college, centralized. Administration, I think we had some explanation around this, meaning your HR practices, purchasing, et cetera. Rate setting, who has the authority to approve those? Performance review, is that happening at the department level? Or is that happening at some centralized, formalized level by the provost, the vice chancellor for research, or some institution level committee? And then if you're renewed or sunset, where does that decision lie? Okay. In our survey, we had 175 responses with 1 to 5 responses per institution. We had 94 institutions represented, and 59 of those had medical schools and/or cancer centers. So in the survey data, which we distilled for this presentation, if we could distinguish between an institution broadly and the response of an institution medical school, we left those in as separate entities. Otherwise, we collapsed everything and tried to get one answer per institution. So here's an example of the responses. There's no strong signal here. If we look at different levels, different aspects of how we define what centralization might mean, we got a range of responses at the same institution. Maybe the overall structure is distributed, but the financial organization is at the institution level. Or rate setting is a centralized function, and everything else is happening at the college level or the department level. Okay. That's the short summary of our survey data. You'll see a lot of slides that look like this. Okay, so then we thought, well, okay, surely those with bigger research programs are more centralized. Okay, that was our hypothesis. So here we ranked, we used the HERD survey, so the NSF higher education research and development data. So those are self-reported data on total expenditures in research and development. This is from fiscal 2023, which I think is the most recent data. So we have institutions ranked top, Johns Hopkins, you probably can't read that in the back, but starting with Johns Hopkins and then going through. This is just a subset. But I will say, there's not a strong signal here. We certainly do not see that those with bigger research programs are more centralized. In fact, if you look at all the data, okay, and you kind of squint a little, and maybe those in the back of the room have a better view of this, you can kind of maybe convince yourself that smaller institutions are more centralized than the larger ones, or those with larger research programs are less centralized than those with smaller. And I think that's a great point for discussion. We were really desperate to find a trend, so we took a subset of the data, looked at, oh, well, maybe those with medical schools or medical centers or cancer centers are more centralized. And no, we don't see a signal there either. When we had multiple responses from institutions, we really only saw moderate concordance between those answers. So if we got responses from those like from folks up here that were running core programs, we got answers that hinted at more centralization, and yet core directors from those same institutions often reported much less centralization. So how do we even represent an institution? I think that's an open question, because as you can see, Boise State University, some folks think, oh, well, that's happening at the institution level, and some folks think, no, that's happening at the college level. And maybe both of those answers are true or correct.
So as Isabelle said, we are fantastic scientists, so we were desperate to find correlation to the best of our ability. And so I was like, all right, let's look at the NIH, since it's going to go away anyway. We should just figure out what it used to be like back in the heyday. Told you you'd be a little depressed by the end of this. So we looked at NIH support for these same institutions, right? Again, here's a snippet. On top of that, what we decided to do is to give points, right? Because colors are great, but let's look at numbers and see what we can do from there. So we gave a point value based off of what you are, just to help distinguish. We went on a 3-point scale because I can count to 3 quite reliably. Centralized got 3 points, federated got 2, departmental got 1, and then you'd sum those up, and there's your sort of global classification. This is to make the global snapshot of whatever it is you are. So then we linked it to the NIH fiscal year 24 funding using the report, which is very NIH-y, awkward to use, but that's okay. You can get numbers there, and we went with that. Now, leading up to this, knowing what you know about the herd survey, what would you expect? Would you expect more centralization if you have more points, right? And therefore, more points equals more centralization, but does that equal more NIH dollars, right? So 15 to 18, right, there are 6 categories. 6 times 3 is 18, so there's your maximum points. You can see the average NIH funding, there's a standard deviation in there, and then the number of institutions that met this range. All right, you ready for the big reveal? All right, I am. Here's how it trends. It's very antithesis to what we expected, and I think what many of us expected, right? It looks at like the less centralized you are, the more NIH funding you actually get, which I don't know what the fuck to say about that. So here we are, right? But it's a very broad representation, and there's 100% certain errors and caveats and nuance to all of this stuff. But this is how it's looking currently, right? It's very awkward, right? But there is trends in there, which is quite fantastic. Yes?
How is the size of the institution represented here?
Fantastic question. So for those of you who didn't hear, the question was, how is the size of the institution represented here? It is not represented here. This is purely based on how they self-report, right? So one of the gaps of our survey was we did not include how many cores are there at your institution, right? And that's one of the follow-up survey questions moving forward. There is a central mic if you want to ask questions. You're welcome to ask questions at any time. Yes, please, you can go over there. I want to make sure everyone can hear. And if I don't like it, I'll just mute it.
You can just tell me to sit down. Heather Jensen-Smith, I'm from the University of Nebraska Medical Center. I also oversee a light microscopy facility. I think it's really intriguing to look at the difference between centralized, federated, and departmental shared resources. And I'm wondering, did you actually do a deeper, more granular dive into what the technologies and techniques contained within these shared resources are? So for example, from my perspective, I'm really thinking about dividing shared resources by asking, what are shared resources that meet common goals that can be distributed across programs and departments? It's a universal shared resource. That's very different than something that might be under a federated or departmental level where we have unique centers of excellence or foci for very distinctive research areas. And in that sense, I think you would start to see some accumulation of different strategies for core facilities because the value add is fundamentally different, the value proposition is fundamentally different for the services that they provide.
No. That's not to be facetious. The reason for that is that is a super tall ask to per institution be like, okay, well, what kind of cores do you have? What is their revenue like? What are they actually supporting? Many of our cores don't even know how many federal dollars they are supporting or sponsored research, whichever way you want to pose that question. However, we are always looking for volunteers to help us get this information. But your point is 100% valid, right? And I think what we're starting to get at is like there's the gross snapshot of what it is, but it's the granularity that'll really tell us what is the true impact versus what is not the true impact. We also wanted to, and then I'll let you speak. Isabelle's saying, shut up, Joe. We also wanted to encourage participation. If we made the survey too involved, very quickly people would tune out and then we would not get anywhere. All right, Isabelle.
Oh, I was just going to mention, we did collect data on what kind of core was submitting the response. So we could look at that. I would say with 94 institutions, I don't know that we're going to get enough in any bucket, again, to see a signal. But I do think overall this is really intriguing data because it challenges the idea that there is a pathway or a strong signal for centralization. And I think the interesting part of the discussion is to unpack why.
I mean, when I look at this data, right, what I see is like when you have an institution which is large, many of the departments can have 100, 150 faculty. And they have enough funding that they could actually have their own course without having to deal with central administration. And I think when we go to try to centralize them, what we find out is they are worried about the control that they lose over it. And maybe that's what this is telling us, is that the larger institutions, because they have the funding at the department level, they tend to be more decentralized.
Jeff Weiss, Northwestern University. So it's interesting that you held us up as a model of centralization since I managed the program for the medical school and I consider it decentralized. And I'm pretty sure I answered the survey. But I wonder if it's as simple as more NIH dollars means more cores means more difficult to centralize. And a piece of that might be, for example, large center grants. So if you have a lot of NIH dollars, you might have a cancer center, CCSG, other types of large organizations that tend to sponsor cores. And I know our cancer center, although they're part of the medical school, they manage their core facilities kind of in parallel with the overall effort, right? So those dollars may reflect just more complexity and more difficulty in trying to truly centralize a program. I guess we don't really agree on what centralization is, but.
Yeah, again, it's an incredibly valid point as to if you have increased complexity, A, what can you achieve, and B, how centralized can you truly be? Because when the structure becomes too complicated, is it even viable to have one central office that oversees actually everything? I also realize our color code is bad. We should have had centralization be gold so we can follow the yellow brick road. Sorry. Anyway, please, next.
Soma, Florida State University. When we are looking at the color coded, I mean, as scientists, when you look at it, I'm asking exactly opposite of why do we have to go to that such a granular level? Can you, when you're not able to make a pattern of something which you're expecting, of course this tells us something, maybe we should ask a different question. Instead of having 7 categories, could you reduce into 4? I don't know which ones would be aligned with each other, and see whether that pattern, reduced set of parameters gives you a little bit better correlation with the data, right? And you have a very, I think it's a very granular level of questions you are asking. Of course, it's easy to finish the survey because you have only 4 or whatever number. That's my question. Thank you.
So I think, I mean, we can go back and look at any one of these slices. But honestly, if you just go down pick any one of those columns, and I think you will still be hard-pressed to see a trend. I mean, we can keep going and bundle and unbundle and pack and unpack. I think the signal that we're seeing is that it's a complex environment, and particularly larger institutions have a variety of models that appear to be working. That's what I would conclude. And we have some thoughts on what are the constraints on centralization, and I think G2, pointed one out. You get very large, it's complex, and the way the money gets distributed is going to provide benefits for one model over another. And then at Northwestern, the example that there are some complexities involved with running cancer centers or other centers. And I think we're seeing that all here.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what Jeff was saying. I mean, the cancer center, because of their unique grant structure, they pretty much manage their own, and they would be considered as a federated, right? And then some medical school, like our New Jersey Medical School, has got a very good, robust culture of centralizing their course under the school. But then the Robert Wood Johnson Medical School doesn't do it. So and the question of when we started to think about centralization that came up was, one, I feel it is unwieldy if you have to manage 90 cores, right? And then the second part of it is you need some kind of domain knowledge to be able to be making effective decisions. We have engineering cores or food innovation center or agricultural and experimental stations as core facilities. You have no idea what the heck you're doing. So I would rather have the school be responsible for that and instead provide a framework where rate setting, sunsetting, or starting a core becomes a centralized function. So that's kind of the trade-off that we ended up making. Because originally we started out with, we have this great idea that we're going to bring everything together, and just was not possible. Even though you offer carrots like, I'll take over the HR functions, I'll take over all your billing functions, right? It just is not the right method, at least in our institution, because of how distributed we are across the state.
Thank you.
Hey, Joe, Isabelle, thanks for organizing this great session. I want to share my personal experience from an individual core to a centralized core. So I started as an individualized core, and then one of the administrators told me, other people too, as a core, you really need to self-sufficient. Otherwise, that's not sustainable. And then, it started as the cancer center shared resource. The director recruited a leader to oversee the shared resources. And he really had a strong passion in cause. Then he organized the shared resources first, then with the support of a VP who was extremely supportive and really aligns with the mission, and then organized the anti-university. So I'm not sure whether I mentioned it, from Baylor College of Medicine, Houston, Texas. So then right now we have 27 core facilities under the same umbrella. And then it's completely centralized with its own administrative team and the administrator, accountant, and everyone over there. So the budget is centralized as well with the budget from the universities. And the executive director really pushes everyone to one published paper, the technology paper published in the JBT, and 2 of them. And then also apply for S10 grants. So we have a lot of S10 grants each year submitted and also obtained. I think that's really helpful with the centralization. I feel my job is much secure, and then I could hire people, though the hiring could be restricted, but without any money or support, you could not hire anyway. So if it's possible with support, I think centralization is the best for the core directors and the staff. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah. One of the things we did discuss after looking at this crystal clear data was like sort of why bother, right? Like, why do anything? And we've gone back and forth. We have a slide at the end that's where we are going to conclude on. But some of it is that exact same impression. Do you feel more supported if you have a stronger centralized structure, and therefore do you feel more secure in your own job, right? And that's a big deal. Not quite sure how to capture that, though, in a survey. Like, that gets very challenging. But your point is very, very well taken. And I know at my own institution, a lot of the core facility people feel and think this exact same thing, that if we were more centralized, we'd be more secure. We want to be looking over our shoulders all the time.
And
Yeah, you can.
we actually did have a question, how satisfied are you with your structure? And there was no correlation, we don't have the data shown here, no correlation with degree of centralization. We did have some comments, so there were folks who indicated they were highly centralized and they were incredibly frustrated by that, felt like they weren't represented at whatever the central level was, felt that it was inflexible. We got all kinds of feedback. Conversely, there were folks at a very decentralized place that say, we don't have enough guidance, we would really like more funding. I think most people think that if they are centralized, that means more funding. It may not. So again, it seems very context specific, whether sort of what roles become centralized, where those benefits are. And as Jeetu mentioned, I mean, he is finding places where centralization and coordination is really, really helpful. But that has to be balanced with places in which centralization maybe presents a constraint or an inefficiency or a removal, kind of a distance from the discipline experts.
I think it all comes down to the size of the institution. I think in the medical school, like the Baylor College of Medicine, that's still a contained unit. When you have the undergraduate schools added, probably they cannot do the same centralization, right? I mean, to me, that's the context in which we should think. But probably based on what we found in the survey, where the same people in the university can't have the same terminology, maybe that's where we should start out, is everybody should have the same terminology in which we, at least within your own institution, there should be a socialization of what centralization means, what does a local core means. And I think that maybe we should start from there and then look at efficiencies and how effective the cores are.
Josh Rappaport, Boston College. So I think you missed a fourth category, which is chaotic. And I mean, I'm being glib, but to respond specifically to, or to follow up, I guess, on what Jeff said. So when I was at Northwestern, I basically had 4 different oversight and reporting avenues. So there was the university, Phil, now Andy, there was, Jeff in the med school and Rex, and there was the cancer center, and there was Nikon, because I was running a Nikon imaging center. And of course, Jeff was the only one that mattered. I want to go on record. But so I think from the point of view of the core director and the core administrator, it can be totally different, because I think, maybe if you asked Phil or if you asked me or if you asked Jeff, you might get different answers to that same question. I think it makes total sense to me. Now, one suggestion I do have, because when you're doing a survey, you don't want suggestions of, why didn't you ask this, or you could ask that, or add this, you should I think an actionable suggestion is, because the NIH data is robust, and we've already heard about like CCSGs, P30s, like you could say, like, we're gonna categorize, do you have a CCSG or not? What percentage of your funding is, in individual investigator initiated R-type funding versus, PPGs or whatever. Like that is, because that data is available and robust. Obviously, it's not super easy to weed through, but you could say, like, how centralized are universities that have, a high percentage of their NIH funding is or isn't from center grants and, larger grants versus smaller grants. Like that is an analysis you could do that might be enlightening.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Josh, for volunteering to do that with us. No, those are great suggestions. Hi, Megan.
Hi, Megan Kraft, UNC, Chapel Hill. I just had a couple of follow-up comments. There was the comment about the CCSG cores, and as someone who spent many years directly in our local cancer center, I feel like there could be so much better collaboration from the top down around cancer centers, because I think the implication of saying, well, the cancer center owns it, but oh, by the way, it's our university flow core that everybody uses. We need to make sure that they don't have the capability of sort of screwing the little guy by saying, oh, well, we pay for this, but we want to do it this way. So I think when it comes to centralization, having the data is the most impactful piece by saying, is your user group paying campus, or is it just in an apartment? And I think that really helps to echo to senior leadership why we need to be more involved with some cores versus others. I agree. I have over 130 on campus, and 2 kids is a lot already, so I can only imagine having 135, adding my normal children. But I also agree with what was just said, that when there isn't centralization, it's a lot of mom against dad, because they go to their department and maybe their department gives them what they want, or if they don't, then they go to the cancer center, or they go to the vice chancellor, or they go to their dean and play the woe is me card, I didn't get anything, even though I know of a few PIs that then just get it from all of them. So centralization is helpful in a way that, at least if we're all speaking the same language and we all know the data sets, then we can kind of move things forward.
Yeah, so one comment to that, again, at my institution, what I feel that many of the cores are wanting is what they feel is an equitable opportunity to get support, right? There's some people who know how to play the game, and most of them do not. And what they want is just the opportunity to get support, not necessarily always be getting support. They want to feel like the playing field is fair, right? And centralization may help with that, but is it centralization all the way, or is it just federation that is needed? It's a great point.
To add to Megan's thing, right? I mean, I feel like that's where you need to identify platform technologies that should be university-wide. For example, some of our cores from the Cancer Center are available across the board, and the Office for Research does support the cancer centers by putting in 50% for the course deficit. So again, identifying those platform technologies would probably help overcome what you're just talking about.
Hi, I'm Murali from Stephenson Cancer Center in Oklahoma, University of Health. So we are a small institution, and we are just seeing all these problems coming up on the bigger institutions. So this is great help for us to understand it. But right now, I think what we are trying to be is away from the centralization, I guess, because whenever we go to the purchasing, that's the place we are getting that they're trying to centralize it by the purchasing, stopping us from going outside the institution or within the institution also, to make sure that there is no duplication and things like that within different cores available under the cancer center or under the university itself, because the cancer center has its own, the medical school has its own cores, different cores. That's how I think the smaller institutions as we are trying to be away from the decentralized, because that will help us to grow in multiple ways also. So it's just an added comment for being small institution and trying to be decentralized and helping us to get a better funding also. So thanks.
Hi, I'm Kara from UNC Chapel Hill School of Medicine. So I am totally struck by the fact that you guys got totally different data from the same institution. And also that doesn't surprise me, because I think core directors don't always even know who other core directors report to, and if it's the same person that they do, and in what aspect. And I totally forget who it was, but somebody's comment that it was chaotic, and you might have different reporting responsibilities to different people, makes it feel like you're very decentralized, like everybody's asking you for the exact same thing. Can they just talk to each other? And that's something that we're trying to work on at our university to help streamline that, because we do recognize like that admin burden is huge. And so I will admit in front of everybody that I didn't take your survey, so if you could put up the QR code again, I'll get you another data point. But I think that that's kind of a terminology point of education. Like you said, like what does centralization mean? Is it you report to one person? Is it a central office? And do you even know what a central office is that does any of these things, right? Like HR or like, some of it is really centralized, and I don't think even the cores realize. And so maybe that's something that like I could take back to my institution and do kind of a learning of, but also that might be something like coming back from ABRF. Can we just all agree on definitions? Because I think that's sort of a fundamental problem. Like people don't even fundamentally agree what a core facility is, right? Like even less a centralized core. So thanks.
Thank you. Yes, Roxanne.
So I'm from Johns Hopkins. You flashed our discordant numbers up there. Maybe you could go back to them. So part of what you might not be capturing in there is, I noticed when they were up there briefly on the screen, you have Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital included in with the School of Medicine. Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital is in Florida and is a separate financial entity from Johns Hopkins in Maryland. And I probably am the top line there, because I did fill out your survey. There's also like some complexity at Hopkins that could not be captured in your survey. The department can shut me down, keep me open. I have to, the Central University requires that I use iLab if I want to get what they call core coins funding. But if I run a deficit, my department has to cover that deficit. And if the department decides that they don't want to cover my deficit, they can shut me down, and the institution doesn't care. And that has happened to several cores this year. But HR is all institutional. Like, my department helps, but I have to go through the institution HR. So it's a really complicated situation, and in the end, it's really the department that has the most control, but the institution decides to stomp on the department for some things. And so I think that might be part of what you're seeing, and also why many of us didn't answer the same way within the same institution.
I really enjoy you're so decentralized, you're in multiple states.
Actually, we're in multiple countries, or we were until all the USAID funding got trashed.
Fantastic.
So, I mean, I think you're emphasizing what the results show, which is it's a very complex landscape. We could parse out each one of these categories into multiple functions that fit. What is admin? Of course, it's not one thing, it's many things. But I don't know that we'll get any closer, or we'll have just more colors on this chart, but I think we have the answer that it's a very complex framework. And the signal that we thought we would find about centralization does not appear to be there. So but we do need to do some data cleanup right, we do need to do some data cleanup, and I appreciate that correction. Some of it, we did keep medical schools separate from the institution. As I said, we haven't shown those data here, but again, I think the diversity of colors is reflecting what people are commenting on the complexity of the environment that they work in.
So we have two lines. We're going to alternate back and forth. Is that okay with everybody? Great. So Andy, you're up.
Yeah, thank you. Andy Chitty from Oregon Health Science University. I really applaud you for taking this on. I know it's really complex, and I can't imagine being able to make sense of it in the initial approach here. That said, with what the woman from UNC said, I think that reflects the need to define our terms and make sure that we're all talking with the same language. You mentioned that earlier, and maybe that's a good starting point for us, is to try and develop terms and that we can all use consistently amongst ourselves.
Exactly.
Jennifer Koblinski from Virginia Commonwealth University, and that's actually pretty much what I was going to say with Andy, is seeing, if I didn't answer the survey either, so I apologize, but I would have answered it completely different now seeing your definition, because I'm part of the Cancer Center supported cores, and also those end up being usually centralized, right, at VCU. But more recently, there was a conversation about our new Liver Institute wanting to stand up their own 8 cores. And our executive director nicely told them that you couldn't call them cores then. They could only be shared facilities. And I started thinking about that, of what you have up there, and it's like, yeah, we have all 3, right? We have some things that fit in all 3 categories. So I think that's the other part, is that definition of it will be helpful.
Exactly, yeah, and that we noticed that very early on, just on the slide where it shows the duplicated results from the same institution, yet they're saying very different things. Depends on where you fall on the spectrum. However, when you start trying to relate it back to finances, that becomes extremely challenging, because you only get the collective response from the NIH or the HERD study, not based off of what are these departments doing versus what is the Cancer Center doing. Now, to build off of what Josh said, you may be able to back calculate some of that, right? But the more addition and subtraction and multiplication and division we start doing, the more nuanced it becomes, and then how much are we influencing it versus just the global big picture, right? It becomes a very big challenge.
Mike Bertram, the University of Alabama, Birmingham. We're in the middle, 6 years into a new experiment with centralization, and we've come across kind of a different way to approach it, which would lead, if you asked various cores from our institution, this diversity. So we have a cancer center, a medical school, 8 other schools, and the idea was we were going to create a centralized mechanism for cores that was self-identifying. So the cores were asked, hey, do you want to be part of the central program? And you had to have user base from more than just one school. So there would be cores excluded that were very specific to a school or department, and that you would get some money, some HR support, and some financial organizational support with doing billing and things. Right now we have, and so it's an open competition, and it was reviewed by a multidisciplinary panel, including our engineering school and public health and so on and so forth. And we ended up with 15 cores that initially received funding. Now the funding isn't a whole lot. Frankly, our cancer center still puts more money into cores than our central institution. But it's in the middle. We're seeing how it goes. We're struggling with those multiple reporting lines for the cores. But again, I don't, kind of like what Jeetendra was saying, I don't know that in a complex institution you're ever going to get away with having every core be centralized. So I think this is actually a reflection of a reality.
Hey, Joe, so it's interesting, actually. So I've been sitting here listening to the responses, thinking about how Northwestern was misunderstood. And what it kind of dawned on me is that we're all of these things, actually, because there are some things like things that are compliance related that for sure are centralized, largely under Andy's office, because they need to be. These are things the university can be held accountable for, things like rate setting, right? There's other things where we can influence, and so we set policies. So for example, in the medical school, we have a non-compete policy. So we won't allow a core to offer a service that's already being supported in another core. those sorts of things. And there we use money and coercion to try and get people to behave. And then there's things that we don't want to manage centrally at all. So we really don't insert ourselves into the operation of individual core facilities. We don't tell the core directors how to run their cores. We don't tell them who to hire. So really, trying to put us into one of those bins, I realize now, wouldn't make any sense, right? It all depends on which part of the program, and some of them are just necessarily going to be done in different ways.
And I think that's the message that comes through not only the data, but the comments in the data, that one has to be strategic about which functions of a core program one chooses to centralize, and that there's no blanket benefit. And I think that is also dependent on your university. We have a slide here. I don't know, maybe we could go to that, the benefits. I don't know where it is. Towards the end, okay. That there's no blanket statement. Where are we? Okay, here. You know, that I think a program has to be very mindful about what it thinks it's going to accomplish through centralization. Often, upper administration and core directors will have very different ideas about what the centralization process is going to bring them. And it has the potential to both bring benefits and bring risk or harm. You know, will you have more accountability if you centralize? Well, it's possible that you'll have more rigor and consistency. It's also possible that if you centralize, that decision makers will be very disconnected and removed from the cores. We have the experience of a core that was very closely aligned with chemistry that got centralized, and a lot of the connection to the discipline was weakened. Folks think that some folks think they will have more control, there'll be greater alignment, greater predictability, but when you move the center of control away from the department or the colleges up to a central entity or body, you could also suffer from being under-prioritized and neglected because you're no longer one of those priorities. Do things get more efficient if you centralize them? That depends on your institution. We have lots of examples of things that move to centralization and get orders of magnitude less efficient. So that's a question. Is your university or unit institution good at centralizing? So maybe it does improve the resource allocation, and maybe it creates delays and distractions. And then the big thing that I find when I talk to core directors is they have an idea that if they get centralized, they will have more consistent and better funding. The risk is at centralization, there is a person or a select group of people who can then make decisions that impact a number of cores at the same time. So whereas a department might make a decision to reduce or increase funding and affect a handful of cores, our Vice Chancellor of Research can make a decision that says all cores are now getting less funding or more funding. And so maybe it's more consistent because everyone's getting subjected to that, but it may not be any more predictable.
Hi, Kathy Yarbrough from Duke University. We have a couple of interesting things. So our department, the Human Vaccine Institute, is kind of like a company within the university. So we have our own HR, we have our own finance, we have our own safety. So we're very departmental with our cores as well. But there are other cores at Duke who I have no idea, like if they're under institutional, under the School of Medicine, because we are so fragmented off. One of the things that's also interesting with our lab is we are actually half funded as a core for the Gates Foundation. So that is absolutely nothing to do with the university. And you know, they don't even get to look at that. They get the F&As, but that's about it, which, you know, might decrease. But, you know, it's just kind of interesting that, you know, you can see the different answers among the same institution, especially when you have one kind of as fragmented as Duke. And to be honest, if we try to centralize at Duke, yes, the question of, will the big scale be able to manage the younger, the smaller cores? No, they can't.
And the capturing the absolute complexity of every single one of our institutions is, even that in its own right, like how would you describe your institution is such a loaded question. There's like 200 people in this room, which is just awesome, by the way. We would get 200 different responses, and then take that word cloud and try to make sense of it all. There's not enough hours at night here in Vegas to help elucidate any of that. Yes, Andy.
Hi, Andrew Vernaro, Tufts University. Thank you guys for the work you did. I think it's great and awesome conversation. If you didn't get to take the survey or get the QR code, it's in the app. There's a couple other surveys there too, so share it with your friends. And then the question, was there any thought or consideration to, once you do close it, validate some of it with the central office at these universities? And I say that being a central office that didn't answer the survey because I couldn't answer some of those questions, but just curious about your thoughts about trying to clean up some of what you saw from the individual institutions.
So as I said, we are amazing researchers, so N is going to equal 1, and we'll go, no, but spot checking is important. I did wake up in a panic this morning thinking I made up all the NIH numbers, or when I was sorting, I was like, oh my God, is this all wrong? And it turned out I did sort correctly, so I'm very proud of that fact. But yes, we definitely need spot checkers, and going forward as we try to, we'll get this into JVT in a shareable format, we are going to validate it. Now, to validate all 94 and hopefully now 150 something or other, that may take too long, right? So for the purposes of expediency, given the situations many of us are in, we will spot check some of them and then just sort of take that. If we're accurate enough, we'll propagate that forward. But that's for version 2 though of the survey, now that you're all super intrigued, it can now be like a 5-minute survey where you're going to spend more time on this, which is fantastic. Thanks, Danny. And yes, please check out the app for the other surveys. Surveys are fun. Sheena.
So thank you all for doing this. This is a topic that we have talked about for years, right? It's no secret that I am an advocate of centralization. What I think the question that's missing is it has to do with the strategic mission of the institution. And I think we all have to think, we are supporting the research mission at our institution. And how can we do that better? And so at NYU, our decision was that it was centralized because we could better support the goals. So I think if you kind of try to address that question, I don't know how to do that in this survey, but to tease that out in terms of why would you even do this, right? It's a big question.
Right, well, as I think about, why would you centralize it? It's because you want all the green boxes. But what you should be aware of is all the red boxes are possibilities too. That is not just green boxes. So I think at least my view of the situation is not be for or against centralization. That's not the question. It's to be for the benefits, to be against the risks and harms, and then to be cognizant of what your institution is capable of. And so there's context, there's size, there's funding. But yeah, I guess my conclusion is don't assume you're going to get the green boxes. It doesn't just come because you centralize. You have to be mindful. You have to do it in a way and work to the strengths and the abilities of your institution.
And also the people. The people can just mess this whole thing up. I mean, you can just have a cancer center and have one person mess up the whole thing.
Catherine Hale, University of Texas at Austin now. I was kind of going to go in the same direction. Cores, actually, are often considered businesses. Corporations, we don't all want to be corporations. You also want to see mom and pop. And what centralization, I think, really can help with is one thing that we were getting away from is knowing what your institution has so that what you have can support your faculty or your researchers. So gathering that information is useful. Getting your green boxes is useful. Making sure the institution isn't liable, all those compliance things, centralization is good. But keeping that diversity and allowing the smaller cores to serve their constituents, I think, is still good. And as long as enough of those various tasks get centralized, it's a win without making it everything centralized.
Hi, I'm Ben Myers from Yale University. This is now where I give my when I was at Northwestern story. But actually, truly, I think the one green box that's missing here is community. And I think if Phil did anything at Northwestern, by centralizing, it's really, I think to Jeff's point, it's truly not centralized. It's a mixed model. But Phil, by centralizing and establishing the Office for Research, Cores Administration, brought everybody together. And I think that's a really important aspect of centralization that's often missed in the sort of financial and other sort of operational considerations. But just bringing everybody from the university together that's associated with cores had, I think, a huge impact on the whole university and the whole operation there. So I just want to add that as another potential benefit to centralization.
So I agree with that sentiment 100%, and it's something at CU Boulder that I've worked on for a while, building off of what Claudius Mondoma, who used to be at Boulder, did for us also. One of the big things about that, though, is do you really need centralization or just someone who does that, right? That's two separate tiers, right? Centralization means more like here's a bunch of money or here's administrative policy, things of that nature. Community building could be just like, hey, someone's in charge of making social events and helping facilitate communication from the core facilities up to the powers that be, right? So it's a great point. I think it would be interesting to see if you're centralized, if your sense of community is greater than if you're fully decentralized. It's a fantastic question.
Hi, I'm Chris Gates from the University of Michigan. And several years ago, I was tasked to be on a committee to survey the landscape of cores at the University of Michigan. And in the course of the interviews, I found out there was, in fact, another separate committee that was doing the same thing at the same time. So very federated, I suppose. But if you could pull up the slide that shows the NIH awards that were so well sorted. So the NIH funding, that's the funding to the institution as a whole. Is that, that's where those numbers coming from?
That's exactly, those are the exact numbers, and I'll share the spreadsheet where I got it from, is from the fiscal year 24 report poll. So whatever that says, that's what we ran with.
I believe you. But as a core, I really want to be a force multiplier for the community of researchers that leverage the core. And that's not that number. I need to be able to separate out the number that was awarded to researchers that use the cores to figure out which cores and what patterns are most effective for the research community, right? That's a hard number. I get it. Yeah. But that's what I need.
Yeah. I 100% agree, and that's a value I collect at our institution. And what's interesting is the value that your institution may report back to you may not be in line with the report value, right? And it gets to be very complicated, but it is. There's a whole session later about advocating for your cores and the metrics that you utilize. To me, the most impactful one of the most impactful ones that we've come up with is how many sponsored dollars, which counts, federal and gifts and stuff like that, is your core supporting? And then you do it individually and collectively. And when I show that collective dollar being in the hundreds of millions, people are like, all right, cores are valuable, right? No, 100% correct in that. don't know how to get that into a survey without all of you going back and figuring out how to pull those reports within your institution, and I'm not going to do that for you.
So we're all here right now. If you tell us what metric to start generating, then next year you can add it to the survey.
Exactly. So, sure, number of cores, right? And get within 10%. Like, I don't want you to literally walk around counting, though. It's a fun exercise to do. Ideally, number of cores. What else should we put in there? Just all of them. How about that? So we're going to follow up, like I said, when we put this into JBT, we will also start like, if you have those federal dollars or sponsored dollars that you're supporting, that'd be fantastic as well. When we put this in the JBT, I'm going to make a note of it, is like, cool, key metrics to start tracking. And so that way, come next fiscal year ABREF 2026, we'll have an amazing next round of a survey. Sorry to cut you off. I just want to make everyone aware, we have about 3.5 minutes left officially in our session. And I'm going to speak for all three of us, we are more than happy to keep this conversation going, but I want you to know that we're getting up to break time, coffee is important, and just want to make sure we're all aware of that.
I might actually kind of throw back the question to the audience and say, you know, our initial introduction to this work was to say, you know, which of our cores are doing great at centralization so that when I am trying to more centralize my program, who can I look to and how can I sell this centralization idea? I can say, well, look at these, you know, 10 fantastic universities that are already doing it and pulling it off. Okay, I'm not sure that's where we ended up. So what is useful to you to know about your peers with respect to degree of centralization? Given the kaleidoscope that we see now, given the complexity and all of the caveats that people have offered, and well, this is unique and that's unique and I have this and also this and this, what is it useful to you to know about the landscape across your peer institutions, you know, as represented by ABRF, that would help you? I think that's where our survey goes. I don't know that I don't know, speaking for you, I don't know that I'm interested in diving any deeper into characterizing the landscape here. I think it's pretty clear that it's very diverse. Okay? So given that, what signal would be helpful to you?
Our names are right there. Some of us have very unique names, which means we're super easy to find on Google. So feel free and email.
I guess that means you're getting all the questions.
Yeah, exactly. Do you know a lot of Dragavons? There's like 50 of us in this country.
Oh,
and thank you for
Joe.
It's Joe. Yeah, Joe. No one's going to just Google Joe. Sorry. Anyway, reach out to us at any time, one or all of us, and we'll start aggregating that list. All right, so let's do just a couple more questions, and then clearly we could keep going all day, but I want to actually say a conclusion thing as well. So I don't know who was next.
I just have a quick follow-up related to this. It seems to me that what we're really asking is, what are our action items? And one of the things that I've heard is making sure that we have universal nomenclature to at least agree with who the players are on the field. One of the things I was thinking about regarding the survey and the anticipated publication, what I'm wondering is, and what I see as a potential action item that you referred to earlier was, how do we dovetail together unique business plans that fit within these individual core organizational structures? So it's not necessarily the metrics about where you fall, but how do you strategically align your individual shared resource with other resources and your obligation to supporting individual researchers? How do you build a plan that aligns with different models and then back align that with the overarching mission of your institution, program, departments, and centers?
It's a great question. All right, Megan, last question. Megan's mic has been muted. You can yell and I can repeat it for you.
Task Force 1. So, ooh, you can hear me now.
as soon as I was done. CAN is the, why is my brain not working?
Core Administrators Network.
Thank you. Please join that if you're not part of it. They do a lot around metrics and reporting and kind of helping you get some of that data, but also the executive board is working on our strategic plan, and one of our task forces is really around this, metrics and reports and streamlining data to kind of help with some of these future surveys. So plugs, be a part of us. Come on.
Thanks, Megan. All right, so I do want to just put up this slide. We are going to follow through, right? We talked about this last year at that impromptu session that was lots of profanity and filling out the door. We got to here, we got the survey done, which is good. And now the trick is to get that data accessible to all of you and to write up basically all the things that we've talked about today, to summarize it so you have something to look at. We have this list of these linked sessions. Those are just my mental link of sessions, but these are ones that are just build off of everything that we've talked about today, going off in slightly different directions. The one about metrics is the core value proposition one. Definitely go take a look at that. Then there's a whole bunch of others